Karen stormed out of the small cafe, her face flushed with outrage. She had just finished the most delicious meal she'd had in weeks, but that wasn't going to stop her from demanding a full refund. How dare they have the audacity to charge her for such an exorbitant amount? She was Karen, after all, a self-proclaimed expert on customer service who would not be taken advantage of. As she approached the counter, her eyes narrowed at the young man standing behind it. He seemed unfazed by her angry demeanor, which only fueled her indignation further. "Excuse me," Karen snapped, slamming her hand on the counter. "I need to speak to the manager immediately. The service in this establishment is completely unacceptable, and I demand a refund for my meal." The young man raised an eyebrow, an amused smile playing on his lips. "I'm afraid I am the manager, ma'am. How can I assist you?" Karen's jaw dropped, and she felt a momentary flicker of uncertainty. You're the manager," she scoffed. "Well then, you need to rectify this situation right now. The prices on your menu are outrageous, and the portion sizes are far too small. I'm not paying for this." The manager leaned forward, his expression calm and collected. "I'm sorry, but I cannot provide a refund. You clearly enjoyed your meal, as you finished it completely. If there was an issue, you should have addressed it with your server at the time." Karen's eyes widened in disbelief. "But I'm telling you now, and you're the manager. You should be doing everything in your power to make this right." The manager shook his head, his tone firm. "I'm afraid I cannot refund your money. The prices on the menu are clearly stated, and you made the choice to order and consume the meal. If you have any other concerns, I'd be happy to address them, but a refund is not an option." Karen's face twisted with fury, and she could feel the eyes of the other patrons in the cafe burning into her. How dare this insolent young man defy her? She was Karen, a force to be reckoned with, and she would not be treated this way. "This is unacceptable," she shouted, her voice rising in pitch. "I'm going to leave a scathing review on every single platform I can find. You'll be sorry you ever crossed me." The manager remained unfazed, his expression hardening. "Ma'am, I must ask you to leave the premises. If you continue to cause a disturbance, I'll have no choice but to call the authorities." Karen's eyes widened in shock, and for a moment, she was at a loss for words. No one had ever dared to stand up to her like this. She opened her mouth, ready to unleash a torrent of insults, but the manager's stern gaze stopped her in her tracks. With a huff, Karen turned on her heel and stormed out of the cafe, her heels clicking against the tiled floor. As the door slammed behind her, she could feel the weight of the other patrons' stares boring into her back, and she knew that this was far from the end of her battle. As soon as Karen got home, she immediately logged onto her computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She was determined to make the manager of that cafe pay for his insolence, and she knew just the way to do it. First, she opened up her laptop and began furiously typing a scathing review on every review platform she could find. She spared no detail, describing the subpar food, the rude and unprofessional staff, and the outrageous prices. She even went so far as to accuse the manager of being incompetent and unwilling to provide adequate customer service. As she hit the submit button on each review, a twisted sense of satisfaction washed over her. She knew that her words would have a devastating impact on the cafe's reputation, and she couldn't wait to see the look on that manager's face when his precious business started to suffer. But Karen didn't stop there. She then turned her attention to the cafe's social media pages, flooding them with angry comments and one-star reviews. She even went so far as to create fake accounts just to amplify her message, determined to make the manager's life a living hell. "How dare he refuse to give me a refund?" she muttered to herself, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "I'll show him who he's dealing with." Nobody crosses Karen and gets away with it. As the hours ticked by, Karen's online assault continued unabated. She became a veritable one-woman wrecking crew, determined to bring the cafe to its knees. She even went so far as to contact the local news outlets, pitching them a story about the heartless manager who had dared to deny a customer her rightful refund. But as Karen sat back and admired her handiwork, a nagging feeling of unease began to creep into the back of her mind. What if she had gone too far? What if the manager decided to take legal action against her for her slanderous reviews? Still, she pushed those thoughts aside, convinced that her actions were justified. After all, she was Karen, and she always got what she wanted. This manager had dared to defy her, and he was going to pay the price. Little did she know, however, that her online tirade was about to have consequences far more severe than she could have ever imagined. The next morning, Karen woke up with a triumphant grin on her face. She eagerly checked her phone, expecting to see a flurry of notifications from the cafe's now devastated social media pages. But instead, she was met with a surge of angry messages and notifications. And they weren't from the cafe, but from her own friends and family. Confused, Karen opened her social media apps, and her jaw dropped. Apparently, the story of her online tirade had gone viral, with countless people sharing screenshots of her scathing reviews and comments. But the reaction was not at all what she had expected. Instead of sympathy and support, Karen was being mercilessly mocked and criticized. Her friends and acquaintances were appalled by her entitled behavior, and many of them were even calling for her to be held accountable for her actions. "Karen, what the hell is wrong with you?" One former friend commented on her Facebook post. "That poor cafe owner was just trying to run his business, and you threw a tantrum like a spoiled child. Grow up." Another acquaintance chimed in. "I can't believe you had the audacity to demand a refund after you finished your entire meal. You're the worst kind of customer, and you deserve everything you're getting." Karen's face flushed with embarrassment and anger as she scrolled through the endless stream of negative comments. How dare these people turn on her like this? Didn't they understand that she was the victim here? Determined to regain control of the situation, Karen tried to post a response defending her actions, but every attempt was met with even more scathing criticism. It was as if the entire internet had turned against her, and she had no idea how to make it stop. As the day wore on, the situation only grew worse. Karen's phone started ringing off the hook with calls from news outlets and social media influencers, all of them wanting to get her side of the story. But she was too ashamed and overwhelmed to speak to anyone. Finally, in a desperate attempt to salvage her reputation, Karen decided to reach out to the cafe manager directly. She swallowed her pride and dialed the number, her hands trembling as she waited for him to answer. "Hello, this is Karen from yesterday," she said, her voice shaking. I'd like to apologize for my behavior. I was out of line, and I'm sorry for the trouble I've caused. Is there anything I can do to make this right?" The manager's response was not what she had expected. Instead of gloating or demanding further punishment, he simply sighed and said, "I appreciate your call, Karen, but the damage has already been done. I suggest you take some time to reflect on your actions and how they've affected those around you." Karen felt her heart sink as the realization dawned on her. She had let her sense of entitlement and pride blind her, and now she was facing the consequences of her actions. As she hung up the phone, she knew that things would never be the same again. In the days that followed, Karen's life spiraled out of control. The viral backlash from her online tirade had far-reaching consequences, and she found herself facing a relentless barrage of criticism and ridicule. Her friends and family members, once loyal and supportive, had turned against her. They refused to take her calls or respond to her messages, and many of them even blocked her on social media. Karen felt utterly alone, her once vibrant social circle reduced to a mere shadow of its former self. To make matters worse, the negative attention had also begun to impact her professional life. Karen's employer, a prestigious law firm, had become aware of the scandal, and they were not pleased. Despite her stellar work record, they called her into a meeting and informed her that her behavior had become a liability for the firm. "We simply cannot have someone with your reputation representing our clients," the managing partner had said, his voice dripping with disdain. "I'm afraid we have no choice but to terminate your employment, effective immediately." Karen felt the ground beneath her feet give way as she processed the news. Her job had been the one constant in her life, the one thing she could always rely on. And now, it was gone, all because of her own foolish actions. As she walked out of the office, head hung low, Karen couldn't help but feel a sense of utter despair. She had lost everything: her friends, her job, her reputation. All because she had refused to back down in the face of a simple refusal. With nowhere else to turn, Karen retreated to the solace of her home, shutting out the world around her. She spent her days curled up on the couch, scrolling through the endless stream of negative comments and articles about her online meltdown. The more she read, the more she realized the true extent of the damage she had caused. But even in the depths of her despair, Karen couldn't bring herself to take responsibility for her actions. Instead, she continued to blame the cafe manager, convinced that he was the root cause of all her problems. She convinced herself that if only he had given her the refund she deserved, none of this would have happened. As the days turned into weeks, Karen sank deeper and deeper into a spiral of self-pity and resentment. She had become a pariah, a cautionary tale of the dangers of entitlement and the power of social media to bring down even the mightiest of Karens. And yet, through it all, Karen remained steadfast in her belief that she was the true victim, a martyr in the ongoing battle against the injustices of the world. She refused to acknowledge the role she had played in her own downfall, instead choosing to focus all of her energy on plotting her revenge against the cafe manager. Little did she know, however, that her quest for retribution was about to take an even more unexpected turn. As Karen's online tirade continued to wreak havoc on the cafe's reputation, the manager, whose name was actually Jacob, found himself at a crossroads. He had tried to remain professional and level-headed in the face of Karen's outbursts, but the constant barrage of negative reviews and social media attacks was taking a toll. Jacob knew that he needed to take action, but he was also wary of escalating the situation further. He had considered reaching out to Karen directly, but he was unsure of how she would respond. After all, she had already demonstrated a complete lack of empathy or willingness to listen to reason. But then, a thought occurred to Jacob. What if he could turn this situation to his advantage? After all, he was the owner of the cafe, and he had a vested interest in protecting its reputation and his livelihood. So, Jacob set to work, meticulously crafting a plan that would not only put an end to Karen's crusade, but also serve as a cautionary tale for others who might be tempted to abuse the power of social media. First, he reached out to a local news outlet, pitching them a story about the Karen phenomenon and the impact it was having on small businesses like his. The news team, intrigued by the unique angle, agreed to cover the story, and they even offered to let Jacob participate in the interview. As the cameras rolled, Jacob calmly and eloquently laid out the events that had transpired, highlighting the unreasonable demands and entitled behavior that had led to the confrontation. He emphasized the devastating impact that Karen's online attacks had had on his business, and he made a passionate plea for customers to be more mindful of the consequences of their actions. To the surprise of the news team, Jacob even offered to give Karen a second chance, inviting her to come back to the cafe and have her meal on the house. He explained that he was willing to let bygones be bygones, but only if she was willing to take responsibility for her actions and make amends. The news segment aired that evening, and the reaction was immediate. Viewers across the city were outraged by Karen's behavior, and many of them took to social media to express their support for Jacob and his cafe. Suddenly, the tide had turned, and Karen found herself on the receiving end of the public's wrath. As the days passed, Karen's online reviews were quickly overshadowed by a flood of positive comments from customers who had been inspired by Jacob's story. The cafe's reputation was not only restored but enhanced, with many people praising the owner's professionalism and empathy. Meanwhile, Karen found herself sinking deeper into the depths of despair. She had been so certain that she would be the one to emerge victorious, but now she was the one whose reputation lay in tatters. She had lost everything, and the worst part was that she had no one to blame but herself. As the reality of her situation began to sink in, Karen found herself facing a choice. Would she continue down the path of resentment and self-pity, or would she finally take responsibility for her actions and try to make amends? The weight of her actions had finally caught up with Karen, and she found herself at a crossroads. The backlash from her online tirade had cost her everything: her job, her friends, and her reputation. And now she was faced with the realization that she had no one to blame but herself. As the days passed, Karen found herself sinking deeper into a spiral of self-pity and resentment. She had been so certain that she would emerge victorious, that the cafe manager would be the one to suffer the consequences of his insolence. But now it was her own reputation that lay in tatters. Desperate to regain some semblance of control, Karen turned her attention back to the cafe's social media pages, determined to continue her campaign of harassment. But each time she tried to post a new review or comment, she was met with a flood of criticism and derision from the public. "Give it up, Karen," one commenter wrote. "You're only making a fool of yourself. Take some responsibility for once in your life." Another chimed in, "The whole world is watching, and they're not on your side. Maybe it's time to reflect on your actions and try to make amends." Karen felt her face burn with shame and anger. How dare these people presume to tell her what to do? She was Karen, and she didn't need anyone's approval or forgiveness. But as the weeks wore on, the weight of her actions became increasingly difficult to bear. She found herself isolated and alone, her once vibrant social circle reduced to a mere shadow of its former self. Even her own family members had turned against her, appalled by the level of her entitlement and lack of remorse. It was in the midst of this emotional turmoil that Karen found herself standing outside the doors of the cafe, her hands trembling. She had been wrestling with the idea of going back, of finally taking responsibility for her actions, but the fear of rejection and further humiliation had kept her at bay. But something had shifted within her. Perhaps it was the realization that she had truly lost everything, or perhaps it was a glimmer of self-awareness that had finally broken through the veil of her own self-righteousness. Whatever it was, it had compelled her to take the first step towards redemption. With a deep breath, Karen pushed open the door and stepped inside the cafe. The manager, Jacob, looked up from behind the counter, his expression unreadable. Karen felt her heart racing, her palms sweaty, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. I'm here to apologize," she said, her voice shaking. "I was wrong, and I'm sorry for the way I behaved. I know I can't undo the damage I've caused, but I want to try to make things right." Jacob studied her for a moment, his expression softening ever so slightly. "I appreciate your willingness to take responsibility, Karen," he said. "It's not easy, but it's the first step towards healing." Karen felt a surge of relief wash over her, and she found herself blinking back tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what else to say, but I promise I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." Jacob nodded, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "Well then, why don't you start by joining me for a cup of coffee?" he said. "We have a lot to discuss." As Karen followed him to a table, she felt a glimmer of hope begin to take root within her. Perhaps, just perhaps, she could find a way to redeem herself and reclaim the life she had once taken for granted. As Karen sat across from Jacob, sipping her coffee, a palpable tension hung in the air. She knew that this conversation could make or break her chances of redemption, and she was determined to make the most of it. "I want to start by saying how truly sorry I am for the way I behaved," Karen began, her voice trembling slightly. "I was completely out of line, and my actions were inexcusable. I've caused so much damage, and I know that I have no one to blame but myself." Jacob nodded, his expression thoughtful. I appreciate your honesty, Karen. It's not easy to take responsibility for our mistakes, especially when the consequences have been so severe. Karen took a deep breath, steadying her nerves. I know that I've done a lot of harm, both to your business and to my own reputation. And I understand if you're not willing to forgive me. But I want you to know that I'm committed to making amends in whatever way I can. Jacob studied her for a moment, his brow furrowed in contemplation. Well, as you know, the damage you've done to my cafe's reputation has been significant, he said. And it's going to take time and effort to rebuild that trust with our customers. Karen nodded, her heart sinking. I understand, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Please, tell me what I can do to make this right. Jacob leaned back in his chair, his gaze unwavering. First and foremost, I need you to acknowledge the full extent of your actions and the impact they've had. No more excuses or justifications. Just take full responsibility for what you've done. Karen felt a lump form in her throat, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. You're right. I was completely out of line, and my behavior was unacceptable. I allowed my sense of entitlement and pride to blind me, and I hurt a lot of people in the process. I'm truly sorry, and I take full responsibility for my actions. Jacob nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. Good. That's a start. Now, I have a proposition for you. Karen leaned forward, her eyes widening with anticipation. Anything. I'll do whatever it takes. Well, as you know, my cafe has taken a significant financial hit thanks to your online tirade, Jacob said, his tone measured. So, I'd like you to work here, as a server, for the next 6 months. You'll be responsible for serving our customers and providing the level of service that you so clearly expect from others. Karen's jaw dropped, and she felt a surge of panic. But I've never worked in the service industry before. I don't know the first thing about waiting tables. Jacob held up a hand, silencing her protests. That's exactly the point, Karen. You need to understand the challenges and frustrations that come with working in this industry. And you need to learn to treat your fellow employees and customers with the respect and courtesy that you so desperately demand from others. Karen felt a wave of trepidation wash over her, but she knew that she had no choice but to accept. After all, this was her chance at redemption, and she couldn't afford to let it slip through her fingers. Okay, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll do it. Jacob nodded, his expression still unreadable. Good. Then let's get started. Your first shift is tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. Don't be late. As Karen left the cafe, her mind was racing with a whirlwind of emotions. She knew that this was going to be a challenging and humbling experience, but she was determined to make the most of it. After all, her entire future was now hanging in the balance. The first few days of Karen's new job as a server at the cafe were nothing short of a rude awakening. She had never realized just how demanding and challenging the service industry could be, and she found herself constantly struggling to keep up with the fast-paced, high-pressure environment. From juggling multiple orders simultaneously to dealing with the occasional rude or impatient customer, Karen was quickly humbled by the realities of her new role. Gone were the days of being waited on hand and foot. Now, she was the one expected to cater to the needs and whims of others. At first, Karen found herself constantly on the verge of tears, overwhelmed by the physical and emotional strain of her new job. She would come home exhausted, her feet aching, and her patience worn thin. There were moments when she seriously considered giving up, convinced that she had made a terrible mistake in agreeing to this arrangement. But through it all, Jacob remained steadfast in his support and guidance. He would take the time to patiently explain the proper procedures, offering feedback and encouragement whenever Karen stumbled. And slowly, gradually, she began to find her footing. As the weeks turned into months, Karen found herself becoming more adept at her job, her skills and confidence growing with each passing day. She even began to take pride in her work, finding joy in the simple act of delivering a flawless order or putting a smile on a customer's face. But the real transformation happened within Karen herself. As she interacted with her coworkers and customers on a daily basis, she began to see the world through a new lens, one that was far less focused on her own needs and desires. She started to understand the challenges and frustrations that service industry workers faced on a regular basis, and she found herself developing a newfound respect and empathy for them. Gone were the days of her entitled, demanding behavior. In its place, a humbler, more compassionate Karen emerged. And when the 6-month period finally came to an end, Karen found herself facing a decision. She could either return to her old life, with all of its trappings and expectations, or she could embrace the changes she had undergone and forge a new path forward. In the end, the choice was clear. Karen decided to stay on at the cafe, this time as a full-fledged employee, committed to providing the same level of exceptional service that she had come to expect from others. She even went so far as to reach out to her former friends and colleagues, apologizing for her past behavior and expressing a sincere desire to make amends. To her surprise, many of them were receptive to her overtures, and slowly but surely, Karen began to rebuild the relationships she had once so carelessly discarded. And as she watched the cafe's reputation continue to soar, buoyed by the warm, attentive service she and her coworkers provided, Karen felt a sense of pride and accomplishment that she had never known before. In the end, Karen's journey from entitled Karen to compassionate, service-oriented employee was a testament to the power of humility, self-reflection, and the willingness to change. And as she looked towards the future, she knew that her story would serve as a powerful reminder to others that no one is above the consequences of their actions, but that redemption is always possible if one is willing to put in the hard work.